In this episode, we're going to take a bit of a look at a Stoic view of the world and your perception of it, to get just a better understanding of where you might start from if you're going to take a Stoic approach to life. So Stoics have a pragmatic and realistic approach to the world. They regard the world very much to be as it appears. There's not many beliefs involved in the Stoic view of the world. It's simply that you regard the world pretty much as you perceive it. Now, there are some tricks with perception, and as we all know, we can do those little puzzles with our eyes and look in books and it becomes three-dimensional and stuff, illusions and things. And we have to acknowledge that we're living in a recreation of the world inside our own heads. But from a Stoic point of view, that recreation, if it is, does vary from the actual tonalities of reality as you might film or record it, still is pragmatic and cogent and relevant to your life, and probably is the most useful way of perceiving it. That, of course, is unless you're suffering from some sort of hallucinations or delusions about the world, in which case you should seek professional help. But for everyday people, regarding the world as it is and not particularly as you'd like it to be, is fairly important, and accepting the world as it is, this idea, as it's now termed, of radical acceptance, is a very important first step and can't be overemphasized. You might say another way to look at it might be to take the saying, there's no such thing as inclement weather, only inappropriate attire. So from a Stoic point of view, the weather is the weather. The question is, what do you do about it? And we'll come to that a little bit later. But accepting the world for what it is and not really making too much of it is an important first step to taking a Stoic position in regard for difficulties in the world. So the next thing that Stoics separate in the view of the world is this idea of the things that you can do and can make happen and the things you can't, and very much take a very big division between the two. So obviously they're talking about what you can say and do and act and where you can go, whether you're constrained or not, what you can achieve within a given period of time, and focusing on your actions, things that you can do and you can change, is the key to the Stoic frame of mind. So it focuses very much on that to the exclusion of what other people might say or do differently, or how the world might be different in some sort of other way. Now, of course, you can mix it up a little bit and you can act in a way as if to influence others. Perhaps this video might be an example. I'm putting it out there in the hope that you might pick up something from it and you might act a little bit differently in the face of difficulty. But I never know whether it's going to work or not. So the important thing is that I've decided within myself that this is a worthwhile thing to do, and perhaps even if only one person benefits from it, I think, well, that's probably enough to make it worth a few afternoons of my time. But you don't actually control what other people do. You can't make them do things. We don't want to get all Vladimir Putin about things and force people into actions they don't want, because all you're doing is acting in more and more unjust ways in order to coerce the actions of others. So focusing very, very clearly on what you do and not trying simply to say that it will be a lot better if a bunch of other people behave differently is important, and it can't really be overemphasized, this division between what you can achieve and what you should be focused on, and where your mental energy and drives should be exerted is in those things that you can achieve, what you can change. So probably worth contemplating that fairly carefully. So Stoic, just to recap, Stoics exist in a real world, pretty much as you perceive it. We can talk about how perceptions change a little bit later on and make that a bit more sophisticated, but the way the wind blows is the way the wind blows, and how it affects you is pretty much what you've got to deal with. So don't worry too much about why it's like that or whether it should be like that. Simply accept that it is and start deciding what you ought to be doing about it. So this is kind of can be seen in another way. That is, the world exists outside of your skin and your perception. And whilst you're a part of the world, your experience of the world is achieved from within your own skin. So everything outside of your skin is part of the world and isn't subject to your, well, mental control. You might be able to exert the odd bit of physical control over it. But that requires some mental effort to place yourself in a position where you can shape the world around you. So thinking about dividing the world from the world within, and where you might think and what you might think and feel about it, how you perceive it, from the world without, which essentially is an objective framework of existence, is a very good start to taking a Stoic position. Now, I probably emphasise that this is also somewhat of a developmental challenge, in that children don't necessarily see the world in such clear terms, and probably the best example of that is this maternal child bond that we talk about. It's very important for personal development. But a maternal child bond does sort of blur the boundaries here a bit between what is the person, if we imagine oneself being the child, and then the mother who meets the child's needs, often in advance of them even being able to identify them and specifically request their needs to be met. Perhaps they might not be talking yet. And this does produce kind of a necessary blurring in these relationships between mother and infant. And I'm certainly not suggesting that infants should take up Stoicism as a philosophy, because they do need to experience the world in a sort of blurry, needs-met way for their own personal development. But as you get older, these impressions and bonds are loosened, and you do eventually, with the right needs being met, you do eventually reach a point where in adult life you can take a somewhat more objective regard on things around you. But it is worth reflecting that this is a little bit of a trick that's really only achieved somewhere in sort of late adolescence through adulthood, and quite a lot of us hang on to some of these childhood impressions or childhood needs about the way the world ought to be. And this often comes out in our relationships where, as people say, sometimes you marry your mother. Well, you might hope you marry your mother. You might run around and do a whole bunch of things for you. But you might find out, in fact, that the person you've married is not your mother. They're another adult who's kind of expecting to live their life a little bit more independently of your unmet needs. So that's kind of an example of where this can go wrong for people. But I think it helps to look in Stoic terms at the situation and see where things really haven't run totally smoothly, and why would people not be able to take a position where the world around them was simply kind of an objective fact and they kind of had to make their own way in it. So that's something maybe to think about as well. When you run into trouble with dealing with the world and you feel terribly cut up about it, and you really think that people ought to be doing what you want because you feel bad, is, you know, what is happening there? What sort of needs of yours are not being met? And might be an opportunity to think about that, perhaps even get some counselling if it's a big problem for you. So we'll leave it at that for today, and I'll be back hopefully within the week with another video. Cheers.